So I'm going to talk about changing the game. What does that mean? Well, fundamentally what I mean by changing the game is the way we look at the deployment of technology, the way that we think about how technology has an impact. I've worked in the IT industry for something in the region of about 20 odd years. During that time, I've worked with a very broad range of different types of organizations across public sector, but also in the commercial sector as well. And one thing that struck me over that time is that quite often when we deploy technology, we can be very siloed. We're not very strategic about how we're deploying that type of technology. We don't really have an end game in mind. And the result of that is that as organizations, we don't necessarily be very agile. It kind of restricts us. And it means we're not getting the benefit, we're not getting the value, we're not having the impact, and fundamentally, we're missing out on understanding what the expectations are of our users. So I'm pretty passionate about this as a subject. And the reason I am is because fundamentally I believe technology can make a difference. But to make a difference, it has to have an impact. Now, I'm quite lucky in the jobs that I do. I've worked for 2 organizations that fundamentally believe what I believe. Currently, I'm the Solutions Director at European Electronique, but I've also worked for Microsoft as well. And as I look at my career, I've kind of sat back and thought, well, I didn't plan to come into technology, probably like a lot of people in the room, let's say. But actually, technology really, really interests me. And my background fundamentally isn't a techie. My background is commercial and sales. But I'm really, really interested in technology. And I kind of thought, well, why is that? What is it about me, my background, that kind of leads me to being a techie? And my family comes from Oldham, and if I look back through my family tree, actually my dad was an engineer, my grandfather was an engineer, and my granddad, being an engineer background in Oldham, fundamentally meant that he was a technician looking after the weaving mills in the cotton industry. So he would look after a team of people within, there we go, it is working. He would work after a team of people within those mills. So that's kind of where my background came from. But what we can gather from that, what I look back and see in that, is that actually there is a distinct relationship between the impact of technology and also change as well. But if we look at change, as individuals, we don't actually really like it. We kind of like the status quo. We like to keep things how they are. And there's a really, really good example of this that pretty much everybody engages with on their daily life, and is probably one of the most used things across the planet, and that's the QWERTY keyboard. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to how old the design is for the QWERTY keyboard? Go on, shout it out. 150 years. Ooh, close, close. Not quite. 138 years old. It was designed in 1874. Now, we can kind of have a guess as to why the design of the QWERTY keyboard is the way it is, but actually I like one of the theories, and the theory goes that they designed it like that to slow people down because if you think of the old typewriters back in the day, the keys would jam and you'd have to go back and start all over again. Wasn't particularly efficient for that time. So we can see that we've got a situation there of something which isn't that efficient, but fundamentally we still use it. There's been keyboard designs that have come along since that more efficient, and that's been proven in various different studies, but still we don't use it. The iPhone has just come out, the version 10 or whatever it is Apple are calling it these days. There's a chance there to just, to display on that whatever keyboard they want, but they're still using the QWERTY keyboard. And we see this with many technology deployments as well. People just going for the next thing. Oh, it's faster, lighter, better. Well, that's fine, that's what I want. But I'm not really changing. I'm not really moving things on. But we can also say that external influences are a big driver for change as well. So change is quite prominent at the moment. And actually what I'd argue is we kind of call that disruption. Disruption has really become the new status quo. And there's some really, really good examples of that. So if you think back to the iPod, Apple stood up on stage at the time and said, 1 million songs in the pocket. And they released the iPod. Fundamentally, that moment changed everything. It brought about the consumerization of IT, and it fundamentally led to a very, very seismic change in the industry. And that was mobility, because the next thing they brought out after that was the iPhone. And that fundamentally changed the business of one particular company that I used to work for, and they're still recovering from that. Because for a very long time they sat there and thought, hey, that Windows device, that's the center of everybody's universe. And it's going to be the center of everybody's universe for a very long time. No, it wasn't. Mobility came along, and all of a sudden, the phone became the center of everybody's universe. And now the phones that you've got in your pocket are more powerful than the PCs that you've got on your desk. So we can also look at some other things coming down the line as well. You think about automation and AI. I had my birthday last week. I won't tell you how old I am. And my wife bought me one of those Alexa boxes, you know, things that Amazon have brought out. Yeah, everybody aware of that one. Obviously, the AI kind of concept and personal assistant has been around for a bit, but they kind of packaged it up and put it onto this thing that consumers can go and buy off the shelf. So I've got that sat there, and it's great. It's all right. I link it to my Spotify, and I sit there and go, Alexa, play whatever the playlist is that I want to play, and it does it, and that's fine, and it's great. But I walk out the room, I come back 5 minutes later, and my 9-year-old is now playing Katy Perry. Because she can talk to it and tell it, play Katy Perry. That's brilliant. She loves it, and she tries to engage it with a conversation. And the reality is it actually can't talk to her very much at the moment. But by the time she grows up, she's going to be walking out the door, getting into the car, and she's going to be telling it where to go. She's not even going to be bothered about getting hold of the steering wheel and driving the direction she wants to go. And that's how fast things can change. So we know we're resistant to change. We know we don't change easily. And we also know disruption can force change as well. And universities have many challenges that have the potential to disrupt them, but also, I believe, fundamentally, have the potential to be embraced and be seen as opportunities as well. So I'm just going to look at a few of those challenges. So the first one is student satisfaction. Obviously, we know about that. We see a lot of universities going out and updating wireless infrastructures because one of the most prominent things for university students is the ability to get on that network. But, you know, we also see some of the things around student expectations of pedagogy as well. You know, the experience that they have on their course. And their experience is very interesting because fundamentally that's what drives how satisfied they are. Because, you know, satisfaction is based on your expectations. You know, if I go out and have a decent meal, I'm going to be pretty upset if it's not the way I want it. But if I go to McDonald's and buy a Big Mac, I'm not really too fussed if it's wonky. So, what are student expectations? Well, I kind of touched on a few there in terms of my daughter and her experiences with AI at the moment. But it's about students' perception of IT. And I would argue, actually, students' perception of IT is very different from the people that are working in organizations such as yourselves, like especially universities. Because the student perception of IT is very much an active thing. Think about their experience with a mobile device. Think about their experience with those devices and the services that run on that device. That sets their expectations about what they want to do, how they want to communicate, how they want to actively get involved with that IT environment. Whereas on the other side of the coin, you know, from an academic point of view, we see that IT environment as somewhere where we can actually put resources, somewhere where students can gain access to course material, lesson material. Yes, that's useful for them, but it's a subtle change from their expectations. So the other challenge that I'd like to kind of touch on is the challenges that we have with our own organization as well. And one of the challenges with a lot of organizations is their size, especially universities. You know, the problem with large organizations is you get silos. And when you get silos, you get siloed thinking. And when you've got siloed thinking, it's very difficult to be strategic. Really good example of this was, for me, was when I first joined Microsoft. I thought, great, joining the biggest software company on the planet, this is going to be amazing. Eager to log in and see what the systems look like. Within about 7 to 10 days, I had something like 30 to 35 different links for different systems that roughly all did the same sort of thing. That's the representation of siloed thinking within the organization. Because universities are built around silos, aren't they? We've got departments. We've got colleges. So it's not easy, but we've got to try and get past those. So the other area where we have challenges is technology. You know, the changing in technology, keeping up to speed. How do we have time to evaluate new technologies? You know, it's difficult, isn't it? You know, there's evolution against revolution. You know, if you look at the trends at the moment towards hyperconverged, which is the fastest growing, you know, segment in the data center at the moment, if you listen to all the IDC reports. It's interesting about that, if you go back, I remember when I was getting into IT, we had these big servers that did stuff, and then we've had lots of them, and then we virtualized them, and then we split them out, and actually we're bringing them all back together again, but we're just calling it hyperconverged. Yes, I get it, it's moved on, but it goes circular, and we pick up new things along the way. So we have to be careful, though, with that. We have to be careful about open standards. We have to be careful about vendor lock-in, because that can restrict your ability to be strategic, and it can restrict your ability to be agile as well. So how do we change the game? Well, firstly, we need to understand it's not all about technology. We want to have an impact with technology, but technology is not a silver bullet. We have to understand where the organization is going. We have to understand the people that are accessing, using that technology. That's really, really important. If we're going to be agile organizations, if we're going to deliver what people want, we need to understand these things. So the first thing that I would like to talk about really on this is strategy. And this is really, really important. You need to have a holistic view across the whole organization. It's surprising how many organizations I talk to and they don't have this. They don't have a view of, you know, where they're going as an organization, what the different departments' needs are within that organization. You know, I was talking to a company literally about 2 weeks ago, and they were talking to us about CRM platform they wanted to deploy. And they kind of sat there and they were like, well, okay, yeah, we're actually moving forward with that CRM deployment now. We've chosen it. But in a little bit, we want to talk to you about the collaboration platform we want to deploy. Okay, all right. And who's going to be using that? Well, it's the same people who use the CRM system. They're going to be using that data and they're going to collaborate. Okay, did you not think to kind of put those two together maybe because one would impact the other and we might be talking about integration of two different systems? Scratching head start. So it's very easy to kind of be siloed and just go and do one thing, do the next thing without actually having a bigger picture, and they certainly didn't. And that can be counterproductive. So we've got to seek to understand the organization, and I think IT has a big part to play in that. There's an interesting stat there. 34 companies see IT as the main driver of innovation. That's down from 74%. Why is that? As IT departments, we should be doing that. We should be driving that change. We should be responsible for that strategy. We should be understanding our own organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cloud. Is everyone familiar with kind of the whole everything as a service? Yeah, shaking of heads, good. I'll assume everybody is. I was with a hardware manufacturer the other day and they said, Graham, I won't name them because it'll give it away. Graham, we've got this really, really new, great thing that we're going to do. It's called this technology as a service. Right, okay. Then it's a bit hardware, by the way. How are you doing that? Right, okay, so what we're going to do is we've got the hardware set and then we'll basically pay for it on a you know, over a rolling period. Right, so it's tin plus finance. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of have to be careful with this whole everything as a service piece. But for me, this is interesting. I got this off, I think it was LinkedIn or Google, or they kind of float around, and this is kind of cloud coffee. And it's a good way of articulating, you know, those different cloud services. But we talk about cloud in terms of being flexible, dynamic, agile, all those great things. It's elastic, yes, that's fine. But we sometimes miss the point of what cloud can actually give us. Because if I go and have a cup of coffee, I'm not really interested in grinding the beans. I'm not really interested in boiling the kettle. I don't actually really want to pour it. I just like the taste of coffee. That's the end game. That's the value to me. So if you look at this, as we move further to the right, we're changing where the value is, where I'm impacting in terms of the value. So if you think about that from an IT point of view, does the end user really care about the patching of the servers? Does the end user really care about the updates? No. It doesn't impact them. It doesn't give them any value. Yes, it's important. Yes, it ensures the systems run. But actually, if you're not doing those things, you can focus your time on where you can have more impact on there as end users. And that's really important. And that's a fundamental shift. And that's something that cloud actually gives you. So cloud services can be an integral part of how we design systems. And there's a really, really interesting talk that I'd encourage anybody to kind of go and have a look at by a guy called David Chappell. Did a 2015 keynote at the Future Decoded event that Microsoft put on. And he talks about the new default platform. And you kind of might recognize this. But still, I talk to organizations where this isn't a default design platform for them, where they are still interested in just servers, SANs, on-premise data centers, and they're not realizing the benefits of what an agile cloud hybrid infrastructure can actually give you. And it does give you agility, it does give you flexibility. Yes, you've got to be careful of the cost because there's certain workloads which will work in there and certain workloads which won't, which is why that hybrid environment is good. But you've got your SaaS, you've got your public cloud, you've got your data center infrastructure, and you've got all the different types of devices that are going to need to access that. But that's the default platform. I would argue actually what we really need to be working towards is a more intelligent platform. One that's more agile, one that's fundamentally integrated, and one that gives you the tools to understand and make decisions that are based on data. One that gives you the tools to understand the expectations of those users and then delivers on the expectations of those users. And that's an intelligent platform. And that becomes easier. If we're more agile, if we're more strategic about the decisions that we make, then we're able to do some of this stuff a lot easier. It's not something you're going to go and build from day one, tomorrow, whatever it happens to be. But if you're strategic, if you understand your departments, if you understand where your organization is going, then this becomes infinitely more possible. So I'll just take you through a few of the components of what I would term as an intelligent platform. And I've kind of touched on a few as I've gone through the talk. But if we look at data first and foremost, we can see that actually that's probably one of the most important things that people should be paying attention to. Why? Because it's the richest resource you have, either from an academic point of view, which obviously is important in terms of the students and pedagogy and progress and attainment, all those things. But the other side of it is also the research data as well that you guys have. You know, that's important as well. So you've got to look at that data and say, okay, we need to understand what's happening with that data. We need the tools to enable us to take that data and make informed decisions about our organization and where we take our spend. You know, do we understand the usage patterns across this network to be able to focus on, you know, the different things that we want to focus on? You know, do our academics know as much about our students as Amazon knows about its shoppers? It's an important question. The other thing as well is that it needs to be integrated. First rule of integration, keep it simple. It's very easy when you grow organically without a strategic plan to end up with multiple systems that will do multiple different things, but there is also a lot of overlap. Try and relook at that and think about the systems that you have and reduce that. There are some things out there that I can see within this sector, certainly, where you could go, yeah, you could replace 3 of those systems with one system. Integration becomes an easier conversation. The data then becomes an easier conversation. The other thing is it needs to be intelligent. I talked a little bit about this when I gave the example of the Alexa device. That's where things are going. And the reason that that's important is because it starts to understand context of the university student. You know, wouldn't it be great if as a university student we walk on campus and we've got an app and we're able to kind of, that app is understanding where I am because we're looking at something along the lines of beaconing technology. And it's sitting there going, okay, well, you've got a course, you've got a lecture in that course over in that part of the campus in 15 minutes. It's going to take you 7 minutes to get there, and here's the direction you need to go in. Brilliant, off I go. Because that's what people are going to expect. That's where AI is going to take us. We have the technology to do that. It's there, it's available. It's just a case of thinking about it and looking at how we actually deploy that. The other thing as well is it needs to be automated. You know, as we look at these type of systems, yes, they are getting more complex, and yes, we do want to keep them simple. But fundamentally, automation gives us control of that, and it enables the IT teams to actually spend less time doing things which don't necessarily add value to the end user. You know, as I was walking around the exhibition yesterday when I arrived this morning, it was great to see there's a stand there talking about, you know, Puppet and Chef. some DevOps tools. Some really key tools in terms of getting automation into your system. Desired state configuration, stuff like that. That's a really important type of technologies that are going to come and give you the tools to help you to automate some of this stuff. So those are some of the characteristics of what I would deem an intelligent platform. I'll kind of then focus a little bit on some of the levels of it. So the first one being engagement. I talked a little bit about that a second ago when I was talking about the intelligence. The engagement is the point at which the student is actually going to be, coming on board with that platform. So, that's about the app experience. That's about onboarding onto the wired or the wireless network. That's about having the experience which tells them where they're going to want to go, directs them around, does those sorts of things. It's the network engaging with them, gives them the experience that they want to. We then kind of look at that software layer. And that's really fundamentally around that student journey, that single point of view of the student in terms of the academics being able to understand what the needs are of those students, but also being able to predict and take analytics and say, yeah, okay, there's some signals there which tell me that there's a good chance that student is actually going to fall off that course. So I can take some action before that actually potentially happens. And the software tools out there that allow that to kind of happen now. And those sit on a kind of a storage and compute environment. And fundamentally those are changing, as I talked about in the previous slide, because we talk about cloud now. So we've got to think about where that storage and where that compute actually sits. Is it the right thing to have it in the cloud? Is it the right thing to move it or put it on premise? We talk a lot at the moment when we are talking to universities and other organizations across public sector about that data center transformation. But if you're going to do data center transformation, you've got to fundamentally understand, why am I transforming it? What am I actually trying to achieve? What's going to be the impact of IT for me in the future in terms of those expectations of those students? We need to think more strategically. We need to kind of change the game. Thank you very much.